Lily, it is so great to have you on the Let's Give a Damn podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and thank you, first of all, thank you so much for responding quickly and for doing this so last minute. This is going to release tomorrow on Tuesday. It is now the Monday, the day after Biden announced that he was leaving the race. And it was on Sunday, the day that he announced that he was leaving the race, that I was like, I need to talk about this with someone that is or was in some way involved in all of this. And you were one of the top three names that came up, and you were the first one to respond. So lucky you. Here we are. But again, thank you. I very rarely can someone pull this off super last minute. So thank you for making the time on, I know, a busy day where you're actually traveling later today, for making this happen. I really, really, really appreciate it. So yeah, welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. We have so much to discuss, but I would first love to begin because I don't know. I hope this isn't offensive in any way. I didn't know who the hell you were before May 15. That was the first time your name sort of came on the radar, probably for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I've been following your work ever since. So why don't you give people some background on who you are? What I would love to know, as much or as little as you'd like to tell, although I'd prefer the former, as much about your upbringing, the who, what, when, where, and whys of how you got here, what made you who you are today. So I'd just love to hear a lot about your upbringing so that we can give some context to the work that you've been doing and this big decision that came about on May 15. So yeah, just go wherever you'd like to go on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say I'm glad you did not know about me before May 15th, I think. I think, I mean, I had a few people that I, was doing media with be like, have you ever done this before this? And I was like, no, like what?
Yeah.
Certainly not. I think if you haven't heard of me, then there's no reason why. But so before, on May 15th, I resigned from my position as an appointee for the Biden administration, which I don't know how familiar people are with like that term, but there's kind of two types of jobs in the federal government of roles. There's civil servants, and that's the majority of the folks within the federal government. And those people they are in those roles regardless of who the administration is. And then there's politicals, AKA appointees. The full term is like a political appointment. And those range from like everything to, the cabinet secretary, like cabinet members are appointees, down to what they call Schedule C positions, which like I was more of a, I wasn't Senate confirmed. And there's about, I want to say 4,000 political appointee roles across the entire federal government. Those are handpicked by the administration, by the White House. And, those jobs are dependent on whoever the administration is. So like if the administration that you are serving under loses the election, you no longer, have that role. And, because of this, they are kind of this, being an appointee. I worked on the Biden campaign, and that is what landed me this role at the Department of Interior that I resigned from. The hiring process is a little more opaque. Like most of the people who were working in, the office of the secretary, for example, which is where I was, were political appointees. Like you have a lot more access to power. And there's a kind of, it's kind of like an elite club to be in DC, and they're jobs that people want, and they can be challenging to get. And you really, I worked for the Secretary of the Interior, but I still was an appointee for the Biden administration, which meant like my ultimate boss was the president, and you serve at the pleasure of the president. And, it is appointees are not supposed to step out of line with
Right.
the administration. So, I think that's so far now there's 3 appointees out of the group of 12 or so people who have publicly resigned. And I think that's something that makes, our quote unquote status as appointees is something that makes our resignation like notable. How I even got to here, I grew up in Southern California. my, in a very, like, I was very stewed and kind of embedded in Jewish community most of my life. I went to Jewish day school for most of my education. My family went to synagogue. We were like very involved in the community in lots of different aspects. Some of like the places that I went for camp and extracurriculars and I did service projects and kind of advocacy projects through Jewish orgs, and was really, I mean, personally, even just really invested in like the community, and I was a very I feel like nerdy has a bad connotation, but like in a lot of ways,
Sure.
a very nerdy kid. I was grew up in a really smart, intellectual, like creative house, and so spent a lot of time. Neither of my parents are in politics, but we watched the news. We talked about what was going on in the world. Both of my parents are very, my dad's a scientist, my mom's an artist. Like we talked about big things and like big questions. And we so I was always like a pretty big thinker and very like cared a lot about what was happening outside of my community even, and um, yeah, I mean, I for me too, like my family was always progressive and voted for Democrats, and I think some of the places like Orange County and San Diego where I grew up are a little more conservative, um, trending more conservative. I mean, they are also starting to change
Right.
as more people move there and et cetera. But we were definitely some of the more like progressive people sometimes, in our neighborhood and in my school, and that was something that I had a lot of disagreements with people that I grew up with about a lot of things, but something that we were all in consensus about was about Israel. And even like my Jewish community was, I think, different than some in the States because it was a little more diverse. Like it was actually mostly Latino Jews from Mexico or South America, um, like a community of Iranian, Persian Jews. There were some Israelis, like it was mostly people who were first gen, people who didn't necessarily identify as white, um, kind of a mix of what we call like Ashkenazi and Sephardic Mizrahi Jews. So like Jews from around the world. Some people who were more religious, some people who were a little more secular, some people who were more conservative. But like this thing that did unite us was the way we thought about Israel and the way we were taught about Israel. And, for me too, I had grown up, again, like I was really interested in history and especially like Jewish history, and both Jewish history from like a religious perspective and a cultural perspective. And, um, knew a lot. I think every like young Jewish kid knows a lot about anti-Semitism, like more than we should probably at an age
Mm.
that is younger than we should. Like people have asked me, when did you learn about the Holocaust? And I feel like I've known about it my whole life. Like I
Yeah.
can't think of a time I was conscious and didn't know about this thing. And part of that is because I, was like reading books that I shouldn't have been reading when I was younger because I was like reading at a high level. And I remember I like during Hebrew school one time like was in my synagogue's library during recess, and my teacher came in and was like, "You should not be in this section. Like, what are
Go
you
play.
doing?" Yeah, she was like, "This is like adult." It was just like the Holocaust section, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever. But yeah, so I think I grew up with this really intense like cultural frame of reference for Jewish history and the trauma of it, both something that was like very much in my family. My mom's family came here escaping pogroms, and anti-Semitism, and then also was very much in the community, um, and it was something that like I experienced anti-Semitism in my own life in non-Jewish spaces, when I was a kid, and so very much had this like internalized this view of like, okay, the Jewish world is safe and the non-Jewish world is not safe for all of these different reasons. Um, and then of course, like the way so many people in my community, a lot of their families went to Israel after the Holocaust, or like, had, I mean, Israel was very much this like salvation for our people. That was the way we were taught about it. That was very much like the reality for a lot of people's family lines. It was very present in our lives. I also grew up around a lot of Israeli friends and family friends, and I have family there. So it was like something that was very present, and very consistent. And like it was just, it felt like, my community and the Israeli community were deeply tied to each other, both in just like interpersonal ways and in this kind of broader like story of history, if that makes sense. Um, and this idea of like, this is the answer to anti-Semitism. This is like, we have to protect
Right.
Israel, because if we ever need a place to go, and that sense of like, we might need a place to go was very strong in my community. Like, we're never going to be 100% safe anywhere. We can't trust anyone that's not Jewish to like actually care about us, and protect us when push comes to shove. So the fact that we have this place we can go is like, consolation in a lot of ways, and a guarantee that something like the Holocaust, or any like effort to annihilate us would not happen again. So those were like, I mean, just a few of the reasons why Israel felt so important to me. And I was like, as someone who was politically oriented, it was very natural for me to get involved in pro-Israel work, because I was already doing like lobbying and advocacy for other things that I cared about, like gender equity, and some like anti-hunger efforts in the community. And just, that was already kind of my like framework for, okay, this is how I can
Right.
make an impact in the world, and help fix the things that I care about. So um, groups like AIPAC were very much a part of my community, and offered this opportunity a lot of times for young people to like take us to DC, teach us about the political process, teach us about like lobbying on the Hill. In a lot of ways, like my things involvement with AIPAC was my first introduction to DC politics. Like, I was knocking doors for local campaigns, but I think AIPAC was the first, or I went to DC for the first time with like my freshman year, you know, class trip. And then AIPAC was, well, I'm trying to think. I did some like Young Democrats of America stuff, but it was a big part of my
Yeah.
political, sort of formation, and like building a foundation of my like knowledge of how the system works. So I started getting, like, I was involved in pro-Israel advocacy in high school, and then that extended through college. And um, I went to undergrad at UC Berkeley, which, in my community is a place that's known to be like widely anti-Semitic, right? And that is kind of um, the thought was like, you're going to go to the UCs and you either like become an anti-Semite, or you're going to get hurt for being Jewish. And I think some people, unfortunately, feel that I've become the former. But it was, it was the first place that I was exposed to, really to the Palestinian narrative in a way that was, it's not that I hadn't been exposed to it before. And I think even when I was much younger, right, I like, a lot of people in my life were like liberal Zionists. I was always thinking about what I viewed as the conflict from a very like, conflict resolution based perspective. Like I was always called a peacenik, a lefty, like I was never kind of a hawk. I was very interested in how do we like actually just end this status quo of violence. And
Right.
like my understanding of how that was happening was, maybe limited, but I think my in a lot of ways, what I want in the long term has stayed the same since I was young. Um, and I think part of that is like the person I am and the values I have, and also, being informed by like, I was in Israel in 2014 and did some of these like dialogue sessions with Palestinian citizens of Israel, and then the war started, or the Operation Protective Edge started,
Yes.
and it was just like really traumatizing. I mean, I like developed some PTSD from having to like run to a bomb shelter for the first time in my life, and also just seeing the way everything shifted from like this dialogue work we had done, to like a very much an othering immediately, just seeing these dynamics at play of like violence and conflict and a complete like, I mean, it's really, I remember when I was younger, one of my like favorite teachers in 2006, I think like a dear family member of hers, was killed in what was the operation in Lebanon. And like, I think like 6, and just like have been around, again, I mean, was very much impacted by October 7th. Like, not to say that this is the way it is for everyone, but um, I do think people who like have an actual investment in real people's lives, the stakes are high. And I know people who I even like ideologically really disagree with still, and think that they are not looking at this from the right premise, but they have loved ones, serving in the army, and are like deeply just, broken about everything, about people dying in Gaza, about the hostages, about like, we can connect on that human level at least. And I know it's because of like, again, that there's real people's lives at stake for them. Anyways, that's a little, I'm kind of going off track here, but
No,
so
that's
going
great.
going to school was like the first time where I was able to really, get to know Palestinians in a context of like that was fully their own. I think it felt like, and I made Palestinian American friends, and I was doing international relations and like doing human rights work, and so it was just kind of like around people who were talking about Palestine in that context. And it took me most of my time at school. And I was still doing like pro-Israel work through most of my time in college. But it was this like multi-year process of, I also went back to Israel Palestine and spent more time in the West Bank than I ever had, and was able to, kind of really see some of the like limitations on movement, the difference in what it feels like within 48 and then being in the West Bank. Um, I started studying Arabic, and I think that's always really helpful because like language is so important, and
100%.
communicating and like demystifying people, and making them not threatening, which is how I definitely was raised to think about Palestinians. I did some work in a refugee camp in Greece, and actually met quite a few folks who were fleeing from Syria, but their families were Palestinian, and they had fled the Nakba in 48 to Syria, and now they were having to leave Syria. And like some of these, multi-generational stories of displacement were just so Jewish to me. Like they resonated with me so much um, on that level. And it was, yeah, I mean, I think really just, yeah, kind of readjusting my worldview, learning a lot, unlearning a lot. Um, and, eventually came to a point where I was also very lucky to find a community of Jewish people who are invested in Palestinian freedom, and Israelis too. And I think that was really important for me, because it helped me. Um, I don't think I would have ever done what I felt like was leaving my like Judaism at the door, or my community, or my, like, it's too much a part of who I am. And as much anger and frustration as I have felt sometimes at the community, at some of like, my elders, I still, I think being able to realize like this is actually also for us.
Mm,
And this is like, I can be, I mean, to me, this is like fighting for Palestinian freedom is a very Jewish thing to do. Um, but to have people kind of hold my hand to getting to that process, and showing me too, like there's going to be people to catch you when you, leave and make the choice to, divest from some of the things that I grew up with. Like there will still be a Jewish community for you, and it will actually be like more fulfilling and values aligned. So that, I started to get involved with some of these Jewish anti-occupation groups, Jews organizing for collective liberation, both in Israel, Palestine, and here. And then I professionally, like, I worked on Kamala Harris's 2019 primary race in Iowa. When she left the race, I went to Arizona to work for the general, because I didn't have it in me I would have gone and worked for Warren, but I think at that point we knew she wasn't. I was like, I can't handle another dropout. I'm just going to go somewhere where
Right.
I can be here through the end, and like it'll be important. My dad's from
Yep.
Arizona. Like, yeah, I just was like, I can't watch another woman bow out. It'll break my heart. So I was there through the general, and then eventually ended up in DC working for the administration. And then come October 7th, it was something that really like rippled through my community, was very, very personal and close, and devastating. And both the like immediate sort of the grief and the losses that were going on within my Israeli and American Jewish communities, but also knowing that something was going, what was going to happen after was going to be worse than something I had ever seen before, and immediately got involved in some of the ceasefire organizing. And it also became very clear to me that like I was, not aligned with people in the White House, that people were making a lot of assumptions about my stances based on my identity,
Right.
which like I know why they were doing it, but I didn't like it. And it also just was very clear to me that people in White House leadership were not interested in hearing my perspective. And we're also, I think, in some ways scared of it because they can't say that I don't know what I'm talking about. They can't say that I'm anti-Semitic.
Right.
I know people who were killed on October 7th. I mean, it just, again, I was just like, I am someone you should be listening to.
Yeah.
And I was, trying to tell them, not only did I not feel like supported by how the White House was responding to this, but it was, I was not comfortable with the way Jewish safety was being used and used to justify what was happening to Palestinians. And also just very explicit that the status quo is like, does not keep Israelis safe. And if and it does not keep Jewish people safe. Right. And like, even if these people were not, clearly not caring about Palestinians in the way that their empathy could extend to people in my community, but it did not seem to extend to then the Palestinian people that I cared about, and, was communicating with people in Gaza and have friends in the West Bank. And that distinction was so, like, even if I knew that existed, to actually feel it and experience it was so jarring. I was just like, wow, you were so great a few weeks ago, like what's going on here? These people live 20 minutes from my family. Like again, it's the same. I was like,
Yeah.
they are all the same to me. Like,
Yeah.
you cannot say that you care about my family or my friends in one place and then that you don't care about the people who would live 20 minutes from them, when like obviously their futures are very connected, even in this moment where there is such an imbalance. Like, but yeah, it just was really, again, to know things and then to experience them are like two different things. And then
Yeah.
I came to a point where I was like, I actually have more. One, I can't be here for myself anymore. Like, I can't be in integrity with myself here. And I'm not going to change anything from this position.
Right.
Because they're not willing to. And I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to leave, I was like, I want people to know internally why I'm leaving.
Right.
And then once I decided that I would do that, I was like, I actually think I have more power if I do this publicly,
Yeah.
to change the narrative.
Yeah.
And
So before we talk about the May 15 extravaganza, when you resigned,
that's my favorite way that someone has described
there you go.
it.
Right. Like, no, but you just did a terrific job sort of laying the groundwork about your life and about the context in which you grew up and all the education you received. There's so much there. We could spend hours just talking about that. We won't today, maybe another time. But what I did want, there's a couple things I wanted to bring up from, what you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to change your mind. We all have that. Most people don't use it. And I
Yeah.
have found that the more religion is, I'm religious as well, deeply. I'm a Christian, for better or for worse, depending on the day. But I
Yeah.
grew up
I mean, I
very
feel.
conservative. Yeah, right. Like it's just like I can't leave it, but also like fuck this.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. Like my people, me, the people that I sort of associate with and run with and walk with and do life with, they're some of them are so terrible, and so you get it,
I mean,
like
yeah.
in our respective communities. But
Yeah.
I find that the more religious people are, in my experience, the harder it is for them to change their minds, because there's this big sort of invisible God figure
Mm-hmm.
that we
Mm-hmm.
sort of fear, that if we change our
Mm-hmm.
minds in any way, if we these scriptures that we've been given, this book, this what a collection of writings that we've been given, right,
Mm-hmm.
again in our respective religions, like there's this fear that if we deviate in any way, um, from everything that it says, like
Right.
every single part of it, that we're going to get in trouble, right? There's this like tremendous guilt that we walk around with. Um, you're obviously very educated. You also grew up in a deeply religious environment. At what point did you begin to feel like how did you begin to say, yeah, maybe it's okay to change my mind on some of things? And what was sort of happening there? Because again, I remember for me that it was about, I would say probably we're 2024. I would say uh 13 to 14 years ago was when I really started to change my mind on a lot of things. Up until that point, there were a lot of things I didn't agree with in my upbringing, but I wasn't ready to just like blow the whole thing up yet, right? I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, maybe in closed groups or behind the scenes, I
Mm-hmm.
would talk about these things and I would feel really bad. Like, am I a heretic for even considering,
Mm.
leaving this belief behind? Um, and so, yeah, it's been 13, 14 years now that I have been progressing at an incredibly, fast pace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, what was that like for you? Because again, these are some of the beliefs that we're talking about, Zionism and all things Israel, right? Like these are deeply charged
Yeah.
sort of topics. And even I, not as a Jewish person, but as someone who grew up in conservative evangelicalism, I mean, Israel was everything for us. Like we
Yeah.
would die on the hill of no, Israel has the right to exist, and they can frankly do whatever the fuck they want to maintain that existence. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
growing up in my conservative Baptist church, there was an Israeli flag on the stage alongside the American one. And this is in like there, I guarantee you there was no one of Jewish descendants in the congregation, but it was there. Like it was there was so much talk of Israel and defending
Wow.
Israel and Israel's rights and this and that. And I frankly, in
Mm.
the midst of all that talk about Israel, I can't remember ever hearing anyone talk positively or negatively about Palestinians. They just didn't exist, right?
Right.
They like
They're
we
not
didn't talk.
present.
They are not present in the
Yeah.
conversation. It's all about like Israel has enemies, but we're not even going to name them. We're just going to talk about
Yeah.
Israel's right to
Yeah.
exist. And so that's the sort of environment I grew up in. At
Mm.
what point, going back to the changing your mind thing, can you recall sort of a period where you were like, wait, I just changed my mind on this and no
Mm-hmm.
lightning struck me, like I'm okay, and I actually feel freer and better about changing my
Mm-hmm.
mind on that thing that I thought was really big. What was that like for you as you began to change your mind about things?
So, I mean, one thing I'll just say it's so interesting. A lot of synagogues in the U.S. have both the Israeli and the American flag. I did not know it extended to some churches, but I mean, I was definitely, so my dad's family is not Jewish, but was not, raised. I mean, they were Unitarian, like very
Yeah.
different. I was exposed to the whole Christian Zionism thing through the pro-Israel world, and something that I've said that I think is in some ways really fascinating is like, at first, before I had a real understanding of Christian Zionism, like it was in some ways kind of healing for me, because
Mm,
I had had these negative experiences with, I mean, there's evangelicals in Southern California and kind of, very intense Christian communities who, like, in the years that I was in public school and just like had some really nasty encounters that were really scary
sure.
for me as a kid. And um and so, because for me, like being pro-Israel and I know doing, caring about the Jewish state, like meant caring about anti-Semitism, meant like protecting my community, my family, all that. To see non-Jewish people, especially Christians, what I felt like, was by extension their support for Israel meant they cared about us. That was so cool. Like that to me was like, wow, this is so amazing and beautiful and like surprising.
Right.
Then I was able to, more fully understand the whole concept of the rapture and just like the way, I mean, if Palestinian people aren't even spoken about, like in a lot of ways, Jewish people are very much like a pawn in this sort of larger vision, where our safety at the end of the day is like going to be completely compromised by whatever people think will happen when the second coming happens, which is death, for
Yeah.
a lot of us, or like a massive
Yes.
war.
Most.
So
Yeah.
starting, yeah, most, yeah. So once I understood that, I was like, oh, interesting. This is like quite. And then I think, I mean, one of the things. So while I was in school, I Trump was elected when I was a sophomore. Um, so for me, this like changing my mind started to happen, like, what I was talking about, the exposure to new things and kind of just getting all of this like learning and unlearning and kind of grappling with, okay, what I had been taught and then not taught about, and the reality of like what Israel in 2016 compared to, I mean, even 48 we know was terrible, and like I was not really taught about the Nakba, but like the way Israel is an illiberal state, at this point, with an incredibly powerful army backed by the US, like it's not a David in the story anymore,
Right.
at all. And it is not, just like people fleeing a genocide, right? Like that is what, most of the Jewish people who came to the state in the 40s were Holocaust refugees. That is not the situation anymore. But so that was happening at the same time too as this like transformation in the United States, where Trump was in power. That was also emboldening an increasingly right-wing Israeli government to be much more explicit about their fascism, and ethno-nationalism. Not that they hadn't before, but again, just like an equal sort of empowering of each other. And then so seeing a lot of these people that I had been doing pro-Israel advocacy with, um, support Trump, and
Mm,
seeing people respond really positively to him when he came and spoke as a candidate at the AIPAC policy conference was like horrifying for me. Um, and I just was able to, like, I was realizing, I was like, okay, these people are not invested in the vision of America that I want, in a vision of Israel that I still, or even like I was saying, like in a thriving future for everyone, like in
right.
safety, in
Right.
dignity, in self-determination. They were not invested in that. I mean, and they were clearly did not care about Jewish safety too. Like that felt very clear to me, because Trump is someone who was loved by white nationalists, and you know I mean, I just, I started was had these moments of like, how am I in the same room as these people? Like, what
Right.
is going on here? um there's no way that we are values aligned, or that they can care about like my community and all of the communities that I care about. So I think that was, I mean, that was helpful in realizing like, okay, hold on, it's, I'm, something is amiss here. um and something I'll say is like, Jewish culture and religion, there's this saying like, two Jews, 10 opinions. Like, we argue and debate as a essential part of our culture. Like,
Yeah.
Jewish law is not even the Old Testament at this point. It is commentary, like the Talmud and the Mishnah are thousands of years of commentary, which is rabbis sitting around a table debating something from the Torah and then debating something else, and that just was like written down. It was passed down orally, and then it was written down. So like Jewish law is literally like, this rabbi said this rabbi said this rabbi says they're wrong, and then eventually they come to, the way we learn and do text study is sort of debate centered. I mean, one of the things that I feel like I internalized from a very young age about Judaism is that, like, people like Abraham even like questioned God, like that you are supposed to question authority, especially when you think that authority is doing something wrong. Um, and then that coupled with what the like lived experience of Jewish people has been, I mean, the Holocaust was
Right.
entirely legal, right? Like this idea that when you are at the bottom of society, society is not always going to be structured for your benefit. And a lot of things can be legal or acceptable or, fine, but that doesn't mean that they are just or right. And that has, been our experience for so long, really up until the last like 100 years. Things have been very different for Jewish people in America and in a lot of parts of the world. But like, so to me, that was such a central tenet of like what it means to be a Jewish person, is to question things.
Right.
And then on Israel, all of that is different. And I think I wasn't necessarily like aware of this contrast, but as I became more aware of it, it just didn't make sense to me. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like a particular moment. I mean, I do think being in the West Bank in 2017, having been in school for a few years, it's a Trump administration in the US. Like I'm starting to get involved with some organizing and just like the vision for collective liberation in the United States, and what that means. And then like seeing the contrast of, a highly militarized Israeli society that I had been familiar with, but I think looking at it through slightly different eyes.
Oh yeah.
And it just didn't feel like what some of the things that I had experienced being in solidarity work, and in organizing in the sort of post-Trump era. I did not, what I was feeling in Israel Palestine was the opposite. I mean, I was like, wow, okay, now that I have kind of had a glimpse into what we are trying to like fight against and also build, and then going back to Israel and like, I don't know, it's hard to totally put it into words, but I was just
Yeah.
like, wait, this is actually not right. Like something here
Mm.
is not, this is very broken. And it's not just about security, in the way that I had thought about it my whole life. And I think also being a little older, like being able to realize, okay, I was 20 or 19 at that point. Like, why is all of my peers are in the army here? Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
something that was so normalized for me when I was younger. I was like, these are children. Like,
Yep.
they're babies, and you're just like 17, 18 years old, and it is crazy that the first thing that you do in your adult life is go to the army. And seeing like younger cousins of mine start to do that, and just I think some of that like perspective of being a little bit older too, and seeing like people younger than you're just like, wait, this is not, you don't even know what you're doing. Like you don't even really know.
No, you're just told that's the next thing that I have to do. This is
Yeah, I mean,
expected of
it's
me.
just the way the society works too, and it's the equivalent of going to college essentially. Like that, it is just like the milestone into adulthood. Um, and I think too, I mean, really, people have said this, but like years of genocide education, years of like learning about how people get dehumanized and how that leads to violence, like it is. Unfortunately, it's very possible for people to kind of have the cognitive dissonance that we're seeing, that I
Yeah.
see so much in my community. But like, I do think it is really hard to hold on to that for such a long time. At least for me, it was like,
Yeah.
there came a point when I was like, I mean, I had a language exchange partner through my Arabic program who lives in the West Bank, and like I'm definitely the first Jewish person she's ever been friends with, and we have
Mm,
not actually like met in person ever yet. Um, but and I mean, I don't know when we will, which is
mm,
so sad.
yeah.
But she, became a dear friend of mine, and like, um, I just think, hearing about her experiences, and also again, like learning to understand Arabic in a way that I, had not before. I mean, you just like it is so hard once you are able to humanize people to like you can't go back from that. You can't
100%.
undo that. Um, and then everything else feels insane once you
Yep.
are like broken out of that, that dichotomy that like I was very much raised with of sort of like it's us versus them. It is
Yep.
Jewish safety or Palestinian freedom,
Yep.
really. And like, unfortunately, that is just the choice that we have to
Yep.
make. Because if not, the idea is like, we'll be back at square one. We'll be at, like, people will be trying to annihilate us. And, it's none of this makes sense unless you think about it through like a trauma lens. And then all of it does, which is so devastating in so many ways. But, yeah, I mean, it's just like people I think ask like, how can people do this to people? How can someone do, how can a group of people who have experienced so much, um, you know, persecution and oppression do that to someone else? And it's like, that's actually exactly how this works usually.
Yeah.
Like,
If you look
I
at,
wish it wasn't so,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. No, I mean the statistics tell you whether even if it's someone that's abusing a partner in the home or whatever, or
yeah,
someone that
yeah,
rapes someone else or someone whatever. Like there is not always, but
right,
most of the time, that is a hurt person that is never got better, never got the
yeah,
help they needed, and they start hurting other people. Right.
yeah.
That
And I
was the
think
case
like
in
no, no, I was just gonna say we took, the lesson of like of the Holocaust and of like what being, really like victims of white supremacy. I think, this idea that like freedom is privilege, right? That like that freedom is the ability to do unto someone else what was done to you,
right.
um, is not like unique to Israel or Jewish people at all, and is very much, I think such a like deep tragedy of this moment, but it is the lesson that was taken. And, I think it was also like incredibly convenient. Again, the Western world like did not want to take in Europe and America were not interested in taking in Jewish refugees, and they were very interested in what Israel would, end up being, and the fact that there was like strategic military,
Yep.
um, interests, and it was, I think, just altogether like incredibly convenient, um, and really unfortunate that like in so I mean I think we saw it have seen it play out in these last 9 months. Like when Biden said, if there wasn't Israel, and there wouldn't be a Jew in the world who's safe, right?
Yeah.
It's just like this is the same person who in 1986, I think it was, said like if there wasn't an Israel, we would have to create one to protect our
Yes.
interests.
Yeah.
Like this is not ultimately
Best three
about.
billion best $3 billion you spend every year is what he said or
Yeah, I
whatever
mean,
like
it's
that. Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
I do think that he is someone who like believes in some ways that it's like protecting Jews, and like certainly, cares much more about like is able to extend much more empathy to Jewish people than Palestinians. And I, think he's like, there's just so much anti-Palestinian racism that exists within the U.S. and within the
Yep.
U.S. Government, and it's very, very clear. But at the end of the day, like, I don't think making, I don't think like one, anything that would escalate into like a wider regional war, again, is actually like not in the interests of Israeli people's safety. The status quo does not keep Israelis safe. October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. Like there is a reason why, a system that is inherently violent will also end up hurting the people who are doing that violence. That is just the way things work.
Yep.
Um, and like making, you know, Israel and Jewish people like the face of the American war machine is not, that does not make us safe. Like that
No.
is not how you build like actual safety for Jews wherever they want to live. That's the thing, you know, to hear the American president say something like that is so, you're like, okay, what about me? Like, you know, half of the world's Jews live in America. Like,
Yep.
and there's plenty of people here who would like us to not be here too. And so it's just, you know, it's so, it's like so deeply tragic. And of course, like the Palestinians are the one bearing the brunt of this, and have been for 76 years, you know, and um, it's just like the whole thing is
It's a
deeply
disaster.
painful. Yeah.
Yeah, it is deeply painful. It's a disaster, and countries and states like Israel and the US, like we have to keep talking about our enemies or creating them out of thin air, because we have to
Mm,
justify the I mean, our military budget here in the US
yeah.
is absolutely, it is I mean, it's beyond evil. It's insane. It's completely uncalled for. We don't
It's just
have
so
we
much
don't
money.
have we don't have enemies that warrant even a hundredth of that size military. We have hundreds of
Yeah.
bases that we have people in all over the world, 24 hours a day, 365. And
Yeah.
to justify continuing to spend the 850 billion or 900 billion dollars a year, we have to keep creating enemies or perceived enemies. And Israel is doing it's the same thing. For an American president to say something like that is
Hmm.
absolutely insane. And yet, millions and millions of Americans and lots of people eat that up. They eat that up and they're
Hmm.
like, you're
Hmm.
right, you're right, no Jew is
Hmm.
safe in the world without Israel, even though
Hmm.
the existence of Israel
Are Jewish people
is
safe in Israel? I don't really know. You know,
no.
like safer than than Palestinians, sure, but in the long run, I mean, again, like I don't feel very safe with the idea that like, you know, people are carrying around guns or like quote unquote have to join the army. You know, I mean, it's just
It's
it,
insane.
it's insane. Yeah,
It's
it's,
insane.
and it's actually like in a lot of ways it is part of this cycle of how anti-Semitism works historically, which I think is also like, you know, one of the reasons why like anti-Semitism is different than um or manifests differently than, you know, other forms of like persecute of oppression and racism. And you know, I'm there's more of this happening now, but I think like the part of the reason why it's Israel's been such a like wedge driving issue between the left and the right in the U.S. and something that the right has really like, you know, been able to co-opt is that folks on the left don't always have like a great understanding of anti-Semitism and how it works, and in part because like a lot of Jews in America are white, you know, or
Yeah.
essentially function as white and like have been again pretty like very successful in this country. And you know, I mean, one of the areas I grew up in, La Jolla, is like a town in San Diego.
Yep.
People used to call it La Goya because I want to say until
Mm.
like the 80s, you couldn't buy property there if you were Jewish. You know, like it was not that long ago that there were quotas on colleges and like Jews were not allowed in certain places. But, um, you know, so that is like, I think people have a short memory, but Jewish people have done very well for ourselves here. And like been for the most part like pretty safe in a way that we like haven't in, I mean, definitely in European countries. But anti-Semitism always kind of works as this like, um, you know, Jews are isolated from other communities typically, and then we are like blamed for things and oftentimes used. I mean, you see it in the Great Replacement theory. That's like a white supremacist theory. This idea that Jews are like bringing in people of color to replace white people. You know, it's always this like we are sort of in between the ruling class and other people. And you know, I mean, what I see happening with Israel is kind of like a that playing out on a much larger scale of like Israel is you know, an extension of the American war machine
Yeah.
at this point. And
Yeah.
like um and then of, you know, of course anti-Semitism gets worse, right? And of course like it's just, and then Jews are further isolated from people that we actually need to be in community with. That's the thing. Like
Yep.
we need to be in solidarity with Palestinian people. We need to be in solidarity with, you know, with collective liberation movements across the world and in the United States in particular. Like, you know, I mean, especially in the fight against fascism here at home. And And I think the anti-war movement in the US being revived by Palestinian and Jewish organizers is really scary to people in power. The student encampments, most of those leaders were Palestinian and Jewish students. And that is like
100%.
such a threat to the status quo, that, people were willing to go in and like brutalize students, in reaction to that, because it is such an, again, yeah, it can upend. Like, I really do think that Jewish Palestinian solidarity can change not just what's happening in Palestine, but like has the potential to really have these like ripple effects, and like create a real paradigm shift. And that is
Totally agree.
like deeply terrifying to a lot of people.
It is deeply terrifying to those in power, because they can no longer, again, if it was one side or the other, they can name it, but
Right.
because it's both. Well, this is one of the most horrific things about the last 9 months is that
One.
obviously anti-Semitism is alive and well, and it's fucking scary and
Yeah.
it's horrible. But when you start calling everything anti-Semitism, again, you are putting more Jewish people at risk, in
Right.
harm's way, by call. Now you have a bunch of a bunch of Christians calling Jewish anti-Zionists
Yeah.
anti-Semites.
Right.
What the
Right.
fuck is that even? Like,
Right. Right.
that is so mind-blowing that is now acceptable rhetoric that can get on the news, right? That'll be
I mean,
talked
it's the
about.
House of Representatives. It's the
Yes.
the anti-Semitism bill that the House of Representatives, which is like, I don't know exactly the percentage, but maybe 4% Jewish, I would give it that. Like, I think less. I mean, a majority non-Jewish body doing exactly what you just
Yep.
said, like wanting to codify into law that being anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic. And again, yeah, it's like, first of all, who are you to tell me what's
Yeah.
anti-Semitic and what's
Yeah.
not? Second of all, like, I mean, yeah, just using, I mean, it's I think, yeah, that's like, again, people, I mean, and that is why it is so important. I very much recognize that, like, I, as a Jewish person, as a white person, can have been listened to about this in a way that like
Right.
some of my Palestinian peers are not. And that's really complicated and upsetting, frankly. Like, I don't think it should, I think we should be able to listen to Palestinians when they talk about their own
Yep.
annihilation and self-determination and oppression. But I know the reality is, like, I will again get more, people will hand me the mic. I want to do everything I can to pass it on, but I also think like it is essential for Jewish people to be speaking up in this moment. And like, we are the, like you were saying, if it's one or the other, I mean, us saying, actually, no, like, this is not for our, this is not for our safety. This is not like what we want. This is not for our communities. Like, I refuse to be in, to believe this like binary any longer, that
Yeah.
like my
Yeah.
safety and their safety are somehow at odds with each other. That is, I think, really an important, like, if we can kind of crumble, destroy that whole lie and like that pillar. I mean, I also think it rips off like the real reasons why there is US support for Israel. Like, some of it is, the sort of the like the way the American Jewish community has bought into it. But at the end of the day, like, it's Christian Zionism, it's US military interests, it's all of these like much sort of the people who have much bigger numbers than us and much more power and influence.
Yeah.
And it's more palatable for them to be like, we're doing this because we care about Jews, a minority, a historically oppressed minority and their safety, than like, we're doing this because we want to, like, weapons testing our, $1 billion. We want a gift card essentially for defense
Yeah.
contractors, like
Yeah.
that, or for the rapture, which to most people sounds like an insane thing. That is less palatable. And
Yep.
I think Jewish people have to work to like kind of rip that curtain down,
Yep. Yep.
and be like, actually, no. Again, I don't know, maybe like at the end of the day, I don't really trust a lot of these people to really care about our interests or Palestinian interests, but like, the way I think about it is like, this is my community, this is my people, this is a narrative about me. So I am going to do what I can to to get rid of it and to chip away at it. And at least you can't use someone like, I mean, that's how I felt in the administration in a lot of ways. Like, I'm like, I don't want to be, I don't want to be thought of as like, not that I think people were necessarily thinking, I mean, I, again, was very clear how I felt, but like,
Right.
as a Jewish appointee, right, I'm essentially, my service and my representing the administration and the president felt like a green light.
Yep.
And felt like an acceptance of the rhetoric too that was happening. And I just felt like, absolutely not. Like, you cannot not only like do this to people who I care about, to Palestinians, not just because they are like people that I see as so close to me and like so connected to myself and my community, but also because it is just like objectively wrong,
Yep.
legally, like morally, all of the reasons. But also, like, you damn well cannot use my community's pain and trauma and like real fear of real anti-Semitism
Yes.
as a cover for genocide. I mean, that, to me, that is like such a disgrace to
It
my
really is.
ancestors, to the things that we've been through. I mean, I don't know exactly what they would think, but like, I do hope, again, I just think about like some of, people, the things that my ancestors saw, like, I'm sure that they would have, that they, would, I mean, they probably would identify as a Zionist because it's something we've been thinking about for thousands of years, this idea of like return. But I don't know that they would look at the modern state of Israel and be like, this is good. This
Yeah.
is
This
what
is
we
not what we
envisioned.
dreamed of. This is not what we
No,
envisioned.
like,
Yeah.
when you are, a poor, like, Jewish person living in a ghetto in Eastern Europe, that's just, I would hope that their dream was not like oppression for other people, and I don't think it was, based on everything that was passed down to us for so many
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. So let's talk the last couple months for
Yeah.
a few minutes here. On May 15, the day that is formally, Nakba Day, that many people are thinking about the 1948 Nakba on,
Yeah.
On that day, you resigned. And I'm going to read a couple of the excerpts that you posted on your Instagram before we talk about the next like couple of months here, and we'll begin to wrap up here. You posted part of your resignation went like this: I am an American Jew. My family escaped anti-Semitic persecution in Europe and found refuge in America. 2 generations later, I have the honor of working as an appointee for the President of the United States. The weight of this position is not lost on me. And then you go on to say something, super powerful, I think. The President has the power to call for a lasting ceasefire, to stop sending weapons to Israel, and to condition aid. The U.S. has used nearly no leverage throughout the last 8 months to hold Israel accountable. Quite the opposite. We have enabled and legitimized Israel's actions with vetoes of UN resolutions designated to hold Israel accountable. President Biden has the blood of innocent people on his hands. That was May 15. It was obviously I remember the day. Your name popped up everywhere. What happened in you that day? And what had so 9 weeks later, President Biden finally removes himself from this presidential race,
Right.
his reelection. Something that I have been wishing for and praying for a long, long time, because I even I reluctantly, Biden was not my first, second, third, fourth, or fifth choice in
Totally.
2020. Yeah. It was also the fastest
We
I've ever
all
voted.
rallied.
Yeah.
I mean, we were just
we
like,
did. And we did the right thing, I think, because
Totally.
so many, I can call him Genocide Joe and also say, oh yeah, you did all of these sort of tremendous things. You and your team did these
Right.
tremendous things over the last 3.5 years.
Right.
So it was the right
It's
call
tough.
then.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so tough. It's so tough because humans are tough. Like we're complicated. We're fucking complicated. We have so much
Yeah.
good and so much bad in us, right? Um, okay, so the last couple months, what has that been like for you? What has sort of happened May 15 to what are we, July 22 right now? What has sort of happened
Hmm.
over the last 9 weeks in your life? Yeah, I mean, I assume that you're some version of unemployed, trying to figure out what's next, right? You're also, I think, as we said on the phone this morning, like it's like simultaneous, like don't know what the hell you're going to do, but also like so much going on, right? So, what have the last couple months been like for you since May 15 when you resigned very publicly and very loudly?
So, I mean, I think I had a sense that there, other folks too had resigned, right? And I knew um, it would have an impact. I do think it has been, I think it made a little bit more of a splash than I expected, certainly. And I think, in some ways, some of that goes back to what I was saying of like, um, people expect someone who is Palestinian to care about this, and they do not, even though over the last 9 months, like a lot of Jewish people have been screaming about this
100%.
too, but like they don't, expect someone like me to not, maybe not just care, but like to make a sacrifice for it, right? I mean, because unfortunately, and the way I know some people in my community see it as like I've taken a side, right? Or I've like, I've picked when in reality, I don't see it like that. I think again, like it is not only that like these communities are like connected or that it's not like a mutually exclusive zero sum game, but I think
Right.
it's actually very, very much connected. And like our futures are very, bound up to each other. I mean, that's kind of
Hmm.
the whole principle of collective liberation, right?
Yes.
um but yeah, it's um I mean, there has been a lot of, I guess, work around this. I mean, had been involved in organizing around around Israel Palestine for a few years now, and in a personal capacity, was involved um, with Jewish, anti-occupation groups, and so I've had, I've had more time to do some of that work, and also it's been very nice to like be able to do it fully publicly and like fully, without kind of having to be like, oh, this is in my personal capacity because I can't be,
Right.
because I work for the government. But I mean, a lot of media, a lot of like, the those of us who have resigned have actually kind of joined up and worked together, and we put out like a joint statement a few weeks ago with our policy proposals. I think I have found that people from a lot of different spaces, both like media and government people and policy people, and are kind of looking to um, folks like me for guidance. And I think that's kind of the unique place that like I find myself in, both because of my identity, because I come from the pro-Israel world, and I can therefore I can speak to Jewish communities, some of them who will listen to me, but I can at least speak to like the experience, right, of what this means for myself, and um, speak to people who are like historically pro-Israel. I mean, again, it's like I have a very clear interest in Israeli safety, and no one can say that I don't, or that I don't know what I'm talking about, or don't have like that I'm just like on one side or the other. But also the credibility that comes from having worked, in government and worked for the administration. I think, it's we are this interesting bridge between what Palestinians have been saying for
Yep.
years, what people on the left have been saying, what people in this movement. I mean, honestly, what like the majority of Americans have been saying since October, and now, uh, I mean, whether or not this is a good. Ultimately, I don't think it's. I wish it wasn't the case, but like unfortunately, someone like myself, or some of these folks who've resigned from the military, or, other people who have left government, like we do have this credibility, or whatever you want to call it,
Yep.
that allows us to kind of communicate some of those things to an audience that may not be listening to the other people who have been to the
Yeah.
people who've been saying it for so long. And so I think I have found myself in that kind of unique role. And, I'm happy to like to do that as long as it feels effective.
Yeah.
It's been a whirlwind though. And it's also like, I've received a lot of really positive, beautiful things. I've also gotten some very nasty, I try and mostly avoid like comments and things like that. But I think, again, unfortunately, like my community is not always kind to people
Yeah. Yeah.
who speak up against, the Israeli state. And I experienced some of that over the last few years. It's not the like very first time that I've been public. Um, Certainly the first time to this level. So yeah, it is weird. Also, just like being a woman on the internet, being a Jewish
Yeah.
woman on the internet, I've again mostly avoided, but I have had some friends be like, there's some crazy stuff on Reddit that people are saying, and I'm like, I don't
Oh, I'm
actually want
sure.
to even go there. But yeah, it has been like, um, it will be a somewhat long road to like repair what, some people in my life feel as a betrayal.
Mm,
And like, um, I this was something I thought long and hard about, because I knew that it would cost me not just my job, but like, it would have, an impact in my personal relationships. And that is really hard and sad.
yeah.
Um, and also at the end of the day, something that I just, again, it's like this is just what I was taught to do. It feels like in my
Yeah.
life.
I mean, it's
Um,
very the way you've responded. This is the sort of like the mind fuckery of it all. Is that like the way you responded is very Jewish, right? And the way that
right.
I've
Yeah.
responded, the way that I've progressed, the people that I advocate for. I grew up in a very homophobic, racist
Mm,
sort of upbringing, and now the people that I advocate for, everything in my life is about community and collective liberation. That's the most Christian thing I possibly could do. And you could pick
yeah.
any religion. Islam, Baha'i, Sikh, like they
Right.
all they all have their like weird stuff, right? But then they all basically, if you sort of look at the overarching themes of these different religions, they all point to love, justice, peace, collective liberation. And so that's what's wild is that like what you did was probably the most Jewish thing you could ever do.
Yeah.
And that's what's wild about it. But I do think here's what as a Jewish woman that very publicly left a prominent position, called your boss a war criminal, right?
Yeah.
And your boss happens to be the most powerful person on planet Earth.
Right.
Um, like, do you
Who did get bullied
feel?
into dropping out of the race. So maybe,
Yes,
I mean,
yes, 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 yes,
but
yes.
yeah.
Do you? I feel, and maybe I'm hopelessly sort of optimistic, but like I feel like if there was any chance, if there was any opportunity in the last 76 years for Palestine to get free, I feel like it's actually in the mix. It's in the cards now. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
I don't know what it entails. I don't know how we get there. But I can't remember a time in the last 76 years where there were so many people, so many different kinds of people, so many countries, so many governments, so many religious folks that are standing up for Palestinian liberation.
Yeah.
Like, do you feel that way as well? Like, again, I don't know how we get there. I don't know what Palestinian liberation looks like. And I know that right now, it doesn't look that like there's also like horrific things happening. Well, a group of friends and me, we've been raising money for this young 21-year-old Palestinian kid named Kusi, who has been cooking for every single day for over 50 families. He's from Khan Yunis. They got they
Does he
got
post
pushed
on
out.
Instagram? I feel like I've
Yes, he
seen.
does.
Yeah.
We have been he's one of the many
Hmm.
people that have been, but we've sort of vetted this situation, and we've been raising money for his GoFundMe that we started. Anyway,
Mm.
like yesterday, the message we got was they're bombing our neighborhood again. I don't know if I'm going to survive. I don't know if this is goodbye. And so we're
Oh
just
my
like sitting
God.
there waiting Like, are we going to hear from him again? And then 3 or 4 hours later, we get a message. Like, we survived. There are the way that he sort of described it was there was 11 more martyrs, and
Mm,
like so obviously right now, if you get like stuck
so
in
traumatic.
the
Ugh.
day to day, you're just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, we're
Yeah,
letting this happen. We're paying for it. But if you
right.
sort of zoom out, I feel like Palestinian liberation is in the cards now more than ever in history. I mean, with the ICJ ruling over the weekend,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
things are happening. So, do you
I
feel that
think
way
so.
as well? Like, what's sort of how do you see sort of what's happening? And we'll begin to wrap up on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. And I think, to say to the point of like how exactly it looks, like I also, yeah, I mean, I think that that is something that so often, not just on this issue, but like I saw this in DC and you see it a lot on Palestine of like, oh, we don't know how this doesn't seem possible, right? Or like we don't have the political will for it right now, or the systems, or we don't have the exact map of how it's going to happen, so like it's too difficult. But it's kind of like what we're in right now is also unacceptable, so we
100%.
have to be willing to figure something else out. And I'll say, like, I know Palestinian leaders and scholars and and organizers have been mapping out for years what I know there's like a whole proposal for what like right of return could look like in it, with all this like system of that wouldn't necessarily like evict every Israeli either. There would be like a way for people to buy back their house or like split the whatever. I haven't read the whole thing. I know it exists. I had a friend tell me about
Yeah.
it once. Like, people have been thinking about this, and to not just in a way that means, again, like kicking every Israeli person out of there or like mass violence against Israelis. I know that is how a lot of people in my community internalize Palestinian liberation and what they think it means. But I there are so many people in the movement for Palestinian freedom who like have been very explicit that that is not their goal, and like that is not what they're interested in. um and so I think, like, yeah, I just think that is very important to like clarify and name. Um, but I think we are at a sea change, certainly.
Yeah.
And I also really see what has happened, in a lot of ways with Biden as reflective of that. Like, I don't think he left the race entirely due to Palestine, but like this is a victory for the uncommitted movement. I mean,
Yes.
almost 1 million Democrats voted uncommitted in primaries across the country this year. Um, there Biden was wildly unpopular in part due to the split within the party, the way that key coalitions that he needed in 2020 to win, young people, progressives, Muslim and Arab Americans, voters of color, were feeling very disillusioned by the president because of everything happening. And
Hmm.
um, I think I'm not, yeah, I don't know that I also tend to trend optimistic, like you. And I think it's ultimately a good thing, but it's good to have people also kind of like, I feel like I have friends of mine
Yeah.
who are like,
Reality checks.
yeah, they're like, I wish my brain didn't just think about like threats everywhere. And I'm like, no, that's great, because I'm not. So I need
Yeah.
you we can like balance each other out. Um, I don't think that Kamala Harris is necessarily like the most kind of progressive, right, forward thinking leader that like I would like in this moment. But I do think that there's an opportunity here with a shift in power dynamics within the party, with the way, like, yes, this happened because of pressure from the top and from donors and from people, within the system. But like it also happened because there was a clear Biden was polling terribly. There was, again, almost 1 million people voting, this entire movement of uncommitted people voting against him or not voting for him in the primaries. Like,
Yeah.
things were not looking good from the bottom up. And this is a response to, this is not like an elite coup of the way some people have
Right.
been talking about it. Like, I
Right.
really do think this is part, in big part, a response to what is happening um,
Agreed.
with voters across the country. And so I'm hopeful that the the Democrats will see that what's necessary for success in this moment is to stop kind of playing to this like center that doesn't really exist, and like actually embrace the full coalition, kind of, I mean, what happened in France, right? Like the left was like, okay, we need to beat back the far right. And that means like big tent,
Yep.
progressives,
Yep.
like
Yep.
we are going to take clear stances. Like the thing is with, the right has like, they have a clear vision, right? I don't think it's compelling to a lot of people, ourselves included, but like they have a clear vision for what they want. And they're also not afraid to like be explicit about that and like do things to get there.
Yep.
The Democratic Party has not had a clear vision for a very long time, has
Nope.
not been compelling to voters, has also not been willing to stand up against
Yep.
fascism in a way that people want and that we like desperately need, even when we have power.
Yep.
And so I am hoping that they're like the stakes feel so high in this moment for so many reasons, like for Palestinians, for
Yep.
Americans, for like for so much. And I hope that that brings some kind of clarity about, okay, like let's actually, I mean, do again, like, do they want to win college students or not? Not that,
Yep.
and it's crazy that like people's lives come down to this. It's so messed up, but it's the truth.
Right.
And I think, if they want that to happen, then we have to change unconditional support for Israel and for the Israeli military. Like that is not something that people are willing to accept anymore. Um,
I
and so
have to
yeah,
yeah, I have to imagine that at the top, like issue number one, like number one on the checklist for Kamala and her team this week is how are we going to talk about this?
oh
It
for
has to be.
sure.
You know,
I
they're not
mean,
saying it. They're not. They're not talking about it. Outwardly. But I have to imagine that.
they're
I mean
talking
that.
about it
Yeah,
internally.
yeah.
There's
And
no way.
in the
Yeah,
same way that Biden stepping down was largely due to that, even though they won't say that, I
right,
have
right.
to imagine that they're saying, listen, if we don't get this right, we're fucked. Like we can't win because there are
Hmm.
millions of people that are there's some that you won't get back anyway. There's people that have
Sure.
rejected a lot of my leftist friends, and I'm there right now, but I want to give Kamala the chance to come out and on her own
Yeah.
without having to on her own as a presidential candidate and not as VP to
The VP.
war criminal Biden. I
Right.
want to hear what she has to say before I make my decision. But there are some that
Yeah.
she won't get back. But I think there are a
Sure.
lot. I think there are millions of voters that were sick of Biden's complicity and are saying we want to give Kamala a chance to speak on her own again, not under the authority of not as a VP but as a presidential candidate. So I hope that.
Hmm.
Oh man, there's so many uncertain days ahead.
Yeah.
last question for our conversation today. Even though I could speak for maybe we'll do another one of these sometime,
Sure.
but um, I'm sure you had a career sort of track plan in mind. That seems very obvious. You worked on Kamala's team, and then you worked in Arizona with the Biden Harris ticket, and then now you were in the Department of the Interior. So you had a career path that you were on. Are you
Hmm.
still on that path in a different way, or have the last like few weeks said maybe I need to reconsider? Like where again, I'm not looking for a sort of well put together plan. You're young and this has been a crazy 9 weeks for you. But where do you see yourself taking? You have a platform now. People are listening to you because of the bold step that you took. Do you have any idea where you're going, or is it kind of like day by day? Let's see where this goes.
I think it's a little more, a little, probably leaning towards the day by day, like seeing where this goes. I mean, I'm not. I definitely became, a little more like disillusioned with government and
Yeah,
with a lot of people in power that I respected, right, in the last 9 months than I was before, and I think did come to this realization of like I don't know that I am someone who can kind of put my own personal convictions and beliefs on something away enough to like lock into you know whatever the to be like strategic so that I can climb the ladder enough to, I mean, at least, especially on this, I was just like, I can't,
yeah.
so that what in 5 years, 10 years, maybe I can have like more decision-making capacity in this specific arena. Um, I think I would like to stay in I mean, I don't see a world where I'm not involved in, kind of politics and advocacy
Yeah.
in some way. I'm not against going back to government. I don't know that. I mean, well, I don't think I would have ever worked in the Biden admin again. I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
even know
Yeah.
about the, a Harris admin, but um, I think I am, yeah, I think I am figuring out like, the way that my voice can be like the most power effective, I
Yeah.
guess. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and um, yeah, I mean, I think it's like I'm definitely someone who, I do believe in like change from the inside, and I also very much believe in change from the outside. And I think a lot
Right.
of times, like creating that the conditions for change from the outside is how you actually change these systems, and building power outside of them. Um, I mean, that is where like real power comes from, I think, in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see. Like it's like, you're saying, I mean, it's a lot. It's been, I'm navigating like a new
Totally.
space, and even just, the it's like intense to be perceived on this level, and like,
Yeah.
and just kind of, yeah, going through what that means to like experience this kind of media attention. And uh it's I'm grateful that I have, like, that I can kind of be like, okay, what do I take a minute to figure out the best way to like channel all of this.
Well, what I think is so admirable about sort of how this played out is when you see these people that resign for issues of conscience, like you kind of more expect a Josh Paul, right, who resigned from the
Mm,
State Department, like kind of
hmm
older, like kind of perceived as wiser, have been through more
hmm
things, and they can they've got a plan, they can pivot this into something. But like you're so young that, like, I think that's what stood out to me, is that someone that had a lot more than I think Josh Paul to lose. Like, you're at the beginning of your career to sort of,
hmm
a lot of people would see what you did as like blowing up your chance of going back into government, which I don't think you did. But like, you had a lot more at stake. So I am on
hmm
Team Lily, and I'm excited to see kind of what you do, where you go, and whether you know it or not. I'm sure you know it more now, but like, whether you know it or not, like, you, along the way, for those of us on the outside that are kind of getting loud and at the protests, getting arrested, doing all the stuff, like making a big scene, like, along the way there have been moments that have sort of been an injection of like hope, like, okay, something's happening here. Yours was one of those for me, where it was like, okay, not everybody in this sort of crazy fucked up hamster wheel like is in on it, and there is change
yeah.
happening from the inside, right? Like, I'm sure there are
hmm
people that didn't resign but are they're trying to advocate for, I know there are, that are trying to advocate
There
for
are,
change from the inside, and that's hard. Like, I could
definitely.
never do that. Bless
Yeah.
them for being able to do that. So it
Yeah.
was a moment of like, okay, yes, like, that's the shot I needed, around May 15, and there's been many others since. So thank you so much for what you did, what you continue to do, for being an encouragement to so many of us. And
Thank you
again,
for
like I said,
sharing that.
I look forward to seeing what you do, where you go, and if there's any way that I, or we, let's give a damn, can help you, please, don't hesitate to ever ask. We're here to help, and yeah, so grateful for you.
Thanks, Nick. I really appreciate you like saying that too. I think it's yeah, I mean, like I said, I've gotten a lot of really wonderful, things people have said to me, but it's just like a good reminder too. And I think for folks in government especially, like, it has felt like, for the people, you're right, there's a lot of people who are aligned with us who are inside, and like it has felt very isolating, in the last 9 months, and so, to know that, to yeah, I think it's like, it's just good for us to hear from people on the outside too, that like, that you guys have our backs as well, right? And for people to know that, like, if they leave, right, there's going to be people to catch them. So yeah, it was so nice to get to know you, and have this conversation. Thanks for creating the space for it.